Be'ezrat Hashem, on Simchat Torah, we read the last parasha of the Torah. We read Vezot, HaBeracha, Baruch Hashem. We've gone through every parasha this year. Be'ezrat Hashem, we're going to start again with Bereshit right away. We're even going to read the Pesukim of Bereshit on Simchat Torah. But Be'ezrat Hashem, I want to speak a little bit about the very, very end of the Torah, the last 8 Pesukim of the Torah. Because while the beginning of the parasha is about Moshe Rabbeinu giving his berachot, his last blessings, his last words of wisdom to the tribes, the very, very end of the Torah speaks about the death of Moshe Rabbeinu. As he climbs up the mountain, he goes up to Har Nevo, and he dies up above. So the Gemara Baba Batra, Daf Tedvav Amud Bet, has a bit of a question. They said, Amar Mor, says the Gemara, Yehoshua katav sifro u'shmona pesukim sheba Torah. That section of the Gemara is speaking about who wrote which books of the Torah, the Nevi'im, Ketuvim, who wrote what and where. So it started with Moshe Rabbeinu writing the 5 books, the Chumash, but then it gets to Yehoshua. It says Yehoshua wrote the last 8 pesukim in the Torah. Now that becomes a bit of a problem because it's the Torah of Moshe, and Moshe Rabbeinu had to write everything, and Moshe gave us everything. Every letter of the Torah had to be given to Moshe because that makes the Torah complete. How could it be that Yehoshua wrote the last 8 pesukim? So says the Gemara, Tanya Kamanda Amma, this goes according to the opinion who says, Shemona pesukim sheba Torah Yehoshua ketavan. That this is according to the opinion that says that Yehoshua, meaning there's a machloket, who wrote those last 8 pesukim. The Tanya Vayamot Sham Moshe Ebed Hashem, because in the end of the Torah it says that it writes Vayamot Sham, that Moshe Rabbeinu died there. If Shar Moshe met v'katav vayamot sham Moshe, could it be that Moshe Rabbeinu wrote and Moshe Rabbeinu died there, but Moshe didn't die yet? I mean, how could Moshe write that if he didn't die yet? That would be lying. Ela ad kan katav Moshe, mikan ve'ela katav Yehoshua, diva Rabbi Yehuda. So right, according to Rabbi Yehuda, Moshe Rabbeinu wrote until the very last 8 pesukim, and from that point going forward, Yehoshua wrote the last 8 letters, because that way it would be honest, Yehoshua was writing about the death of Moshe Rabbeinu. Some say it's the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, others say it's the opinion of Rabbi Nechemia. The Gemara goes on. Amar lo Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon now asks him a question. If Shar Sefer Torah chaser otachat, can it be that the Torah lacks one letter? Lacking one letter, the Torah no longer is perfect. The Torah is such a unity, such an achadut of the Torah. You can't lack one letter of the Torah. Uchtiv lakoach et sefer Torah azeh, and Kadosh Baruch Hu tells Moshe Rabbeinu, take this Torah. How could Hashem tell Moshe Rabbeinu to take the Torah if the Torah wasn't complete? It has to be a complete Torah. Ella, rather, here's how the last 8 pesukim are written. Ad kana Kadosh Baruch Hu omer, up until this point, Moshe Rabbeinu, Kadosh Baruch Hu speaks to Moshe, Moshe omer v'kotev, and Moshe Rabbeinu repeats and then writes it. There's all these ideas about Amira here in Ketiva. We're not going to get into about Moshe having to speak the words. I guess it hints over here to Torah Sheva Al Peh, Torah Sheva Bechtav, the higher level, lower level. Okay, beyond the scope of this Dvar Torah. Mikan de'elach Kadosh Baruch Hu omer, Moshe kotev b'dem'a. But from this point going forward, Kadosh Baruch Hu dictates, Hashem says, and Moshe Rabbeinu writes it b'dem'a. Now we're going to get into this world. We're going to have 2 opinions. What does it mean that Moshe writes the last 8 pesukim b'dem'a? We'll get back to that. But I saw a bunch of the Mefarshim bring down that Rabbi Shimon's question is so great. It can't be that Moshe didn't complete it. That this whole, whatever this Dema thing is, it has to be that even Rabbi Yehuda would accept this whole Dema thing. Just Rabbi Yehuda is saying Moshe couldn't have just simply written that Moshe died. That seems to be a problem. Now it's fascinating to me that the Gemara is so bothered about Moshe writing about his death. Meaning why is it so bad? So it's the simple interpretation is that Moshe's midah is emet. Moshe emet, the Torah emet. So he can't write that he died if he didn't, and it's a problem with Moshe Rabbeinu's emet. But I actually saw it brought down from the Arizal, brought down from the Rokeach as well, that Moshe Rabbeinu on this last day of his life was already in the dying process. He was already beginning to die. The higher parts of his soul were already beginning to go up. This explains a little bit why it says that Hashem had closed up the Torah gates for him, the Ma'anot Torah, because certain parts of his neshama were already beginning to leave. There's this idea that people can recognize when the last day of their life is, when they're about to die. We always hear all of these stories that people know because a part of their soul has already begun to ascend. So according to the Arizal, according to the Rokeach, it's not called lying if he writes Vayamot, because Moshe Rabbeinu is in the process of dying. I also saw brought down, quoting the Rabbeinu Bachaye, that the Torah is constantly writing prophecies of the future in past tense. So there's really shouldn't be a problem. Moshe Rabbeinu is, and even bring rise of other parts of the Torah, that Moshe Rabbeinu is writing about his death in past tense as a prophecy, as a nevuah. So he's not saying I died, he's saying I'm going to die, but writing it in like nevuah, prophetic kinds of ways. So this opinion in the Gemara, it's Rabbi Yehuda in the beginning, Moshe can't write that he died. So I guess he's going because Moshe Rabbeinu's midah is emet. I actually saw a beautiful nuanced answer in Rabbi Yechiel Michal Stern. So he writes that when you read these words of Vayamot, we know in the Torah there's no vowels, there's no nekudot. So while we read it Vayamot, Moshe Rabbeinu dies when he goes up, he says you could also read it as Veyimot, that he will die, meaning Vayamot, and it would be now the past tense that he died, Veyimot, that he will die in the future tense. And it could be that on that last day of his life, if we would read the Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu, we would have read it as "and he will die Vayimot." But after he died, now we reread it as Vayamot, and so to speak, I guess the vowels would change based on reality. But it's not called a lie because you could read it in the future. So again, we see all these mefarshim, the Arizal, all these mefarshim are trying to erase that question because it's a hard question. What's the problem with Moshe Rabbeinu just writing that he's going to die? But it seems to be the Gemara says no, he can't be doing that. And even Rabbi Shimon, who says no, he is allowed to write it, but he's writing it b'dem'a. He's writing it with this, whatever this dema word means. We'll go with the simple interpretation. It means tears, dma'ot. He's writing it in tears, which that makes for even bigger questions for the Mefarshim. You can't write in tears. You can't write in water. Like, what are you talking about over here? That's not called even writing it. Is that really answer the question if he's writing it b'dem'a and he's not writing it properly? But even Rabbi Shimon is saying, yeah, there is a bit of an issue of Moshe writing straight that he died, and we have to find some kind of a way to explain it. Okay, so what does it mean, b'dem'a? So there's two main approaches. The Ben Ish Chai actually brings it down very, very clearly. Says the Ben Ish Chai, on the Gemara, Kadosh Baruch Hu Omer, Moshe kotev b'dem'a. So he quotes Morenu Harav Eliyahu Mivilna. So here the Ben Ish Chai is quoting the Gaon Mevilna. The Gaon Mevilna is known as the famous interpretation of this Gemara. So he piresh lashon dimua. But so the Gaon Mevilna learns the word dema to mean a language of a mixture. Which means that the letters are jarbled up, they're mixed up with each other. Veinam chalukim letevot, and they're not separated into words. And then after he died, that's when I guess Yoshua comes along. And Yoshua now breaks it up into the way we read it, into the words that we understand. And everybody explains that this is the idea that we actually mentioned in our other Dvar Torah about the Esh Dat, about the fiery Torah, that originally the Torah, the Ramban explains in his intro to his whole Perush, that we have the Esh Shechora, the Esh Levana, the black fire on the white fire. That originally the Torah was just a bunch of letters, continuous letters, mixed up letters that don't follow in the way we break it up here down below, because they were letters of the names of Hashem. Because really we have Shemot, the whole Torah is Shemot Hashem. And there's so many angles. We always speak about the Pardes, Pshat, Rebesh, Josh, and Sod, our four approaches to learn the Torah. But really there's even more and more layers and more higher levels and more Shamayim, more heavenly versions of the Torah. And in the heavenly highest levels of the Torah is actually Shemot of Hashem. They're names of Hashem's where the letters aren't the way we read it. And then if you ever seen there's the Gemara, the Rashi that speaks about the 72 letter names of Hashem, or the 72 names of Hashem from the three Pesukim. These are 3 letter names. You find them on those fancy Kiddush cups. We have these 3 names. You look at it, you don't know, those are names of Hashem's? Yeah. Those are names of Hashem. The Mekubalim understand the depths of those names of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and what each one symbolizes. But we have all different ways to break up the names of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Even more than those 72, there's different angles of how to make the letters come together. So the Torah up above in the Shamayim was this black fire, white fire, so to speak. It was letters and letters arranged in a different kind of way. So what Moshe Rabbeinu is doing, he's writing the letters b'dem'a, b'dimua. He's writing them mixed up. He's writing down these last 8 Pesukim. Moshe Rabbeinu writes down as the 8 heavenly Shemot of Hashem, the 8 heavenly Psukim of the Shemot of Hashem. He's writing down names of God, contiguous, jarbled up, me'uravim letters. Moshe Rabbeinu was writing those last 8 Psukim as heavenly Torah. So it's true, we don't understand it, we can't relate to it. That's why after he dies, Yeshua's going to come along, he's going to put the commas in the right place, make the breaks in the right place, and organize it in a way that we have our Torah Shalom B'Shamayim. We have our Torah that we can understand, but this way we can answer. Moshe Rabbeinu got a perfect Torah. He had a perfect 100% Torah. He had every letter. He wasn't lacking one ot in the Torah, just the last 8 psukim, those otiyot, those letters were written in the form of heavenly names of God and not in the Torah down below that we're used to. Okay, I saw a beautiful idea in the Hatam Sofer back on Parashat Yitro. I actually want to thank my neighbor Yehuda Geberer, who runs a great Jewish history podcast for those that like Jewish history, where he pointed out this Chatam Sofer to me over Sukkot, on the first night of Sukkot. He said as follows, says the Chatam Sofer, if we go back to Matan Torah, it says, Kol ha'am, after we read about the 10 Commandments, it says, Kol ha'am ro'im et ha'kolot, v'et ha'lapidim, v'et kol ha'shofar, v'et ha'har Hashem. The whole nation was watching. They could see the thunder, the lightning, they can see the sound of the shofar, the mountain is on fire. I actually think it's very interesting. We can say that, here we're seeing sounds. Again, this whole concept of what was going on up in Mount Sinai heaven coming down to earth, but there's heavenly things where things don't make as much sense. We're seeing sounds. I think there is a relationship as well to that, to the black fire and the white fire, letters that are names of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that the Torah now is God's names, even in a clearer form. That's kind of like seeing the sounds, understanding. There's probably hints over here as well to this concept of God speaking and Moshe speaking too. When does Moshe speak? When does Moshe not speak? Okay, side ideas. But it says over here, but then the pasuk ends, Vayar ha'am, and the nation saw, everybody saw what was going on right now. The people saw, Vayanu'u, Vayamdu merachok, and they kind of like shook, they kind of fell back, and they stood at a distance. Meaning, we learned simply that this was such an awesome scene, Matan Torah. We were seeing visions of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the holy Merkava, the Malachim and the Shamayim. All that was taking place was so big that we actually got a little scared and we moved back. But comes along the Khatam Sofer, he doesn't learn that way. He learns these last words that Vayar ha'am, and the nation saw. You know what they saw? Vayanu vayamdu merachok. It's not going on the people, but it's going on the Otiot Torah. Says the Khatam Sofer, Vayar ha'am vayanu vayamdu merachok. Hine ita b'akdamat Ramban. We know the Ramban tells us in his Hakdama, his intro al Torah, Torah sh'lemala ktuva be'esh shechora gabei esh levana. The Torah up above is the black fire and the white fire. He kula shemotav shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. These are the names of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I have to tell you, the intro to the Ramban is such an important, fundamental yesod work to understand some of the depths of the spiritual, mystical ideas of the Torah. So he says, we know it's the names of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Says the Khatam Sofer, Ubamatan Torah nitchabru ot el ot v'nasu tevot elu bereshit bara. And at Matan Torah, the letters came together in the proper order, the proper form, and they became words. Now, I'm not 100% sure from this. It keeps, when they keep talking about me'ubab, dimua, and all these mixtures, it kind of sounds like the letters themselves might not be in the exact order. And the simple interpretation, everybody always wants to say that they just aren't broken up instead of saying bereshit, read it barashit. Hashem created 6. So you can take one word and make it into 2, and that's our eshdat. In the beginning of our parasha, that the eshdat is the fiery Torah, is written as one word as opposed to 2 words. So most of the time, a lot of the time, people see it as spaces. And it seems to be from the Ramban, you can read that also, but I'm also wondering a little bit if they have these mixtures, maybe the letters themselves aren't even in the exact order the way we have it down below. But let's go according to the simple interpretation that the letters themselves are just not nitchabru. They didn't get connected to each other, and they didn't become words the way we understand them. V'chen kulam ubazeh yesh lomar vayar am vayanu'u, and the Khatam says that's the meaning right now. The nation saw vayanu'u ha'otiyot. The nation saw that the letters themselves were shaken; they were moving. Vayamdu merachok echad mechavero, and they now stood, and then now the spaces. They had a space between each other. They're creating the proper spaces. V'nitztarfu v'nasu tevot bereshit bara, and then it became the actual words, the way we read it down below of the Torah of the Aretz, our Lo B'Shamayim Torah. So meaning the nation saw at Matan Torah, we're getting the Torah, and we're actually seeing the words of the Torah. We're seeing the names of HaKadosh Baruch Hu now reforming themselves, making the proper spaces, so we could read Bereshit bara Elokim. We could read every pasuk in our Torah clearly. That's what we were visually seeing up in the Shamayim, the Torah becoming a Torah that we could understand. Now, I saw brought down in the name of the Gemara that we know that Moshe Rabbeinu was only zocher to the 49th gate of Binah. He was me'at me'elokim. The pasuk says he a little bit was taken away from him. That me'at, meaning that 50th gate, he doesn't make it into his lifetime, or he made it, he lost it, he gets it only when he dies. Says the Gemara, if you take the word me'at, mem ayin tet, me'at is gematria 119. So yes, Moshe Rabbeinu couldn't get to the 50th level. He was only me'at. He was only at, for 119 years, he only was able to make it to the 49th gate. But now at 120, this last day of his life, he's zocheh to the Sha'ar Nun. Now at 120, he now surpassed the me'at. Now he gets the full Elokim. He gets the big Aleph in Vayikra. He gets the full Sha'ar Nun, Har Nun Bo, Har Nevo. He gets that final 50th level. And now it's beautiful, because what are those 50th levels? The 50th level are the names of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's the heavenly Torah, meaning Moshe Rabbeinu was finally being zocheh, as we said in the past, to understand the Torah of Rabbi Akiva, crowning on those letters. We're getting to those last 8 pesukim. Those 8 pesukim now, the way Moshe Rabbeinu writes them, he writes them as the Sha'ar Nun. He writes them b'demע. He writes them as names of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He was finally zocheh to the Sha'ar Nun. I saw a cool idea, quoting the name of the Malbim, that he also writes about Moshe Rabbeinu, a little side idea that, when we have the teruma donation, we have we take the percent that we bring up to the Kohen, that's also called dema. And that Moshe Rabbeinu is, so to speak, he is like the truma. When he reached the year 120, he finally became the dema, he finally became the truma of the world, because we know the world is supposed to exist, according to the Mekubalim, 6,000 years. Moshe represents all of us, so therefore the truma is normally seen as 1 in 50. Actually, the truma itself could be 1 in 40, 1 in 50, or 1 in 60. The Beinoni, the middle level, is 1 in 50. So it says Moshe Rabbeinu is himself like the 1 in 50. I guess because he represents the whole Jewish people, so he represents everybody. So we're going to go with the Beinoni, the mainstream. Moshe Rabbeinu represents everybody. He can't be on that level of Rabbi Akiva all the time, the level of the Yechidim, as the Maharal said, because he has to be there for everybody, and that's his job is to bring Torah to everybody. So therefore, if he's really there for the mainstream, let's go with the middle number, the 1 in 50. But Lanudati, I think probably also 1 in 50. Why are we counting that truma? Because 1 in 50 is the Sharnun. He is that level of the Sharnun, and that is the 120 out of 6,000 is 50. Meaning, at the end of his life, he becomes that 150th. He becomes that last Sha'ar. He becomes that Sharnun. He becomes the truma of the entire world. That's based on the Malbim. Okay. That's approach number one. That he wrote B'dem'a. He wrote the mixtures of the letters. He wrote down the Torah of the heavens, the names of God. But then the Ben Ish Chai goes along and he gives now the second, the more classic idea. This is the way that I saw that in one of the English translations of the Gemara. This is the simple interpretation they give. The footnotes will bring us down the Gra. V'yesh mefarshim. B'dem'a is bidma'ot shelo, ketavam, that he wrote them with his tears. Velo b'dio, he didn't write them with ink. Kayaz b'yom Shabbat. Now the Ben Ish Chai has a side idea. So meaning they learned b'dem'a, he wrote it down in tears. And the Ben Ish Chai adds that this day that he died was Shabbat. You can't write on Shabbat. V'asur lichtov b'dio, v'rak b'mashkim, but only you can write with liquid. And v'rak b'mashkim asur lichtov b'dirabanan. It's only a rabbinic decree nowadays that we can't write with liquid because liquid doesn't last. It's not a real writing. But he says back then that dirabanan law didn't exist yet. V'adayin lo gazru rabanan bazeh mipnei she'ein zeh davar mitkayem. The rabbis weren't gozer yet because it's not something that lasts. It's not a permanent writing. Va'ata Yoshua achar Shabbat v'asa aleim havarat kulmus b'dio ad kan devarav. And he goes, the second approach is that, and after Moshe Rabbeinu died, came along Yoshua and he wrote with dio on top of the liquid. Whatever mark was left with the liquid, he was able to be able to write before it disappeared completely, before it was wiped away and dried up. So Yoshua comes with the dio at the end and writes it with the dio. Now, according to this approach, there are many that still ask the question, but still, so that's not called the complete Torah for Moshe if he wrote with liquid, because we see liquid doesn't break Shabbat. It's not really writing. So how does it count? Okay, we'll get back to that. We'll skip a little bit the Ben Ish Chai, and then he closes off. Ve'lefi divreihem tzarich lomar nishar rosh maktiva b'dma'ot. Based on this opinion, we have to say there was a little bit of residue from the tears. Ad achar Shabbat b'derech nes. Miraculously, it didn't evaporate. V'asa alem Yoshua avram kulmus b'zeh nifresh b'sad yishmaya dikdu kado b'katuv she'emar. And this gives us a deep hint. U'Moshe ben me'ah ve'esrim shana b'moto. We say now that Moshe is dying, that he was 120 years old when he died. Lo chahata eno velo nas lecho. We say by us now that his eyes never became dim, and his vigor, the liquid, the moisture in his body never stopped. V'kashe kevan amar lo nas lecho. So he asked the Ben Ish Chai a great question. If it says that his vigor, his liquid, his moisture in his body never disappeared, never evaporated out. Lama parat ala ayin mipnei atzmo. Why is there a separate pasuk that says velo chahata eno and his eyes didn't dim? Just say that he didn't lose his vigor, he didn't lose his moisture. Why do you have to write both about the eyes and his whole self? So he says, if Moshe Rabbeinu was crying on his last day of his life, maybe we're going to say now his eyes became dim for all the tears that Moshe Rabbeinu had writing those last 8 letters. He's completing the Torah, and now he's dying, now he's going up to the Shamayim. Now I guess he's being zochet to the, so if it's tears of happiness, he's being zochet to the Sharnun, or tears of sadness that he's leaving his flock below, and he can't make it into Eretz Yisrael as he prayed so much. Whatever those tears are, he's crying and crying and crying. I might have thought that now his eyes would have gone dim. Yeah, maybe his body's okay, but his eyes are done from all the tears that he's shedding. Says no. Says the Torah, lo chata eno, his eyes are still good. So I saw another fun approach regarding these writing of the tears in Sefer Tesuat Chen. So he writes it can't be that Moshe didn't use ink. He doesn't go according to this Ben Ish Chai that Yoshua brought the ink afterwards because he says Moshe Rabbeinu wrote a good Torah, but rather he says that he was dipping his quill in tears, mixing the tears with the ink. He says why? As he gives a nice idea, he says we know the famous midrashim we spoke about in the past, that where did the greatness of Moshe Rabbeinu, from where was he zochet to the karnei hod, the rays of splendor? So the Midrash explains that extra light came from the ink in his quill, which we mentioned in the past with two primary opinions. We actually mentioned a third opinion from the Shuvei Pinchas, but the simple approach, Vayikra is a small olive. Moshe Rabbeinu was so humble. He didn't want Hashem to write that he was so close to God. So he convinced Hashem that I only want to write a small olive. So the extra ink, they didn't write the big olive with. That ink is part of the Karnei Hod that he got. That extra ink made his glow. There's also the idea of the word anav, the word humble in the Torah is missing the letter yud, because Moshe Rabbeinu didn't want to write that yud either. He was just too humble. So that letter, also that extra ink. And then the Midrash says that he then took the ink and he was ma'avir, took the quill, he took the kulmus, and he was ma'avir al rosho, and he basically spread it on his head. So I saw places say on his hair, on his head, the dark, the black on the black, but then what happened was karan or panav, and because of that extra ink, his face now glowed. So says Sefer Teshuat Chen, if it's true that his face was glowing now, so when rosho, lav dafka, his head or his hair, rather learn panav, he put his face is glowing, he did it on his face. If he did it on his face, he also did it over his eyes. So if he's passing the quill over his eyes, the Beit Einayim, so as he passed the quill over and a little bit of ink got on him, so now he gets the glow, but now the tears of his eyes, he learns that this is actually referring somehow to Moshe Rabbeinu writing these last 8 Pesukim, even though we know he was glowing much earlier after the Chet HaEgel, but I guess, okay, somehow we're going to play with the timeline over here. This ink right now that passed over his eyes mixed with the tears of his eyes, and that's the ink that Moshe Rabbeinu used to write these last 8 Pesukim, because the real greatness of Moshe Rabbeinu, that he was such an anab, that he was so awesome, that he was so great, that's hinted to into these last 8 Pesukim, which works beautifully right now, because these last 8 Pesukim now are the Shemot of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's Moshe getting to that level of the Har Nebo, of the Nun Bo. He's getting to that level of the 50. So we can say earlier on he demonstrated such humility. Could Hashem not hold back from Moshe Rabbeinu getting to that final level? It's the tears of Moshe Rabbeinu crying to Hashem to get so close, crying for the Jewish people to bring teshuvah for the Jewish people, crying to see the panim of Hashem. So ultimately your panim are now going to glow, and with that glow, mixing with your tears, we're going to have ourselves those last 8 psukim of the Torah that correspond to the highest, deepest parts of the Torah, because it's the Torah of the Shemaim. But now let's try to understand a little bit of the depth. What does it mean to write a Torah in tears, to write a bidma'ot? What is it, a Torah written in the tears and in the water that comes out of our eyes? What does that mean to write it bidemah? We mentioned in our other Dvar Torah that we sent out that the Torah is also seen as fire. It's the Eshdat, as we said at the start of our Dvar Torah, the black fire and the white fire. And that's one way to understand how Hashem contracted, that Hashem hid some of his light so that we could experience later. The Torah itself is so great. The Or of the Torah, which is considered to be the Or Levana, the heavenly Torah, it's all so awesome and it's so great that we can't handle it. So Hashem has to conceal it a little bit. And that's the idea of the black fire, as we mentioned in the other Dvar Torah, that according to one approach, we're going to say that it's hiding a little bit of the white light, but according to a different approach, that it's a black fire coming down, that this dark light is coming down, meaning it's a more chashuch, a more hidden version of the Torah, and in that choshech, in that darkness, in that letter het, we could understand a little bit more what's going on in the depths, recognizing that it comes from Mimur Shel Olam, recognize, as we said in our Dvar Torah last week, that ultimately the top of the het is held up, because even the choshech comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but Hashem is actually dafka sending us down a Torah that's a little bit more hidden. That's the black fire. Actually, I heard a nice idea. There's a debate amongst the commentators when Hashem creates choshech, when Hashem creates darkness. Is darkness a creation? Some Rishonim learn that darkness just means there's no light. Is it the lack of light, or is it actually a creation in and of itself? So I'm wondering a little bit if this white fire and dark fire is the same concept. Is the dark fire the holding back of the original white fire, or is it a separate fire coming down itself? I actually think it's the same discussion, and I think definitely there are those Mefarshim who explain they both mean the same thing. It's just the angle we're looking at it. We're looking from down below, from up above, and how we're relating to things. Okay. So that's when it comes to fire. Actually, the Mekubalim speak in a language of light, of or, that we have an ordak versus an orgas. You have this thin, pure, pristine light that's considered to be so great. And then we have an orgas, a more coarse light. And part of the way this world is created is this ordak congeals, it becomes a little bit stronger, it becomes a little thicker to create a physical world that we live in. And the steps by step of how Hashem creates the world, it gets to a more orgas, a more thicker light. That's in the language of the Mekubalim. So I heard that same similar analogy takes place with when it comes to water. That, we have the famous imagery of the waterfalls, the water coming from above down below. We also have, Sukkot, there's all about the Mayim HaTachtonim, the Mayim from below coming back up, and this is the concept of the feminine and masculine waters, water from up, water from down below. But we have this concept of the waterfall, the water coming from up above and coming down into the water down below. The mi from above becomes the yam down below. We have ourselves these analogies of water coming down. Now we know that water also comes in different states. We have the more flowing water. We have water that goes a little bit faster, water a little bit slower. The liquid then can congeal, it could harden, it could freeze, it become like an ice, becomes more concrete. So I saw the same idea takes place as I heard from a shiur from Rav David Yosef Kidbinsky, where he explains that the idea of Dema is also this idea that the Torah is liquid. It's this Torah of tears, and the liquid form hadn't hardened yet. That meaning the Torah itself to become more concrete, just like the light has to become more coarse, so too, so to speak, metaphorically, the water itself has to congeal and itself has to become stronger and harden and freeze a little bit to get to the Torah that we could understand. Moshe Rabbeinu writing down this last bit of Torah, he's writing it in tears. He's writing it in a more liquid form. And that's what the Dema, he says, mean. It's a more flowing liquid form. It hasn't become as concrete. Like we said, the letters haven't like Khatam Sofer. They haven't stood merachok. They haven't stopped. There's still a little bit more. The water is all mixed with each other. It doesn't have itself a solid form just yet. The Torah itself wasn't that level of solid. He says this actually explains all the Gemarot that say Moshe Rabbeinu knew every bit of Torah. How could all the Torah of the future, of the Poskim, of the Diktukim, of the Midrashim, even a Talmid Chacham in the great future, any Chidush that will exist in the future, Moshe Rabbeinu knew it. How did he know it? Because Moshe Rabbeinu's Torah was a Torah of the liquid, of the water, of the flowing. Everything was in it. It just hadn't hardened yet. It hadn't come to its spot to understand it. Like we've been saying now, when it comes to the Torah Shebichtav, the same thing with Torah Sheba'al Peh, that we have the shoresh, we have the root liquid, but it hasn't congealed yet. The letters haven't fallen in the right place. And now we can say that not only in Torah Shebichtav, but even in Torah Sheba'al Peh, all the hints to that Torah Sheba'al Peh, it's all in our Torah. It's just in a purer form. And that's how Moshe Rabbeinu knew everything. He got everything, but it was in Dema. It was in liquid form. It was pure, and that's why he didn't have that congealed understanding. And this also can explain how Moshe Rabbeinu couldn't understand the Torah of Rabbi Akiva, because Rabbi Akiva, until Rabbi Akiva says, "Oh, this halacha Moshe Sinai. Oh, it really comes from me." But now it's congealed into a halacha, into an understanding that's much clearer. It's formed. It's gone from that liquid form down to a more hardened form. That's why Moshe couldn't get it yet. It's the same source. Halacha Moshe Sinai. It's the same source of liquid. It just was in the purer form when Moshe Rabbeinu wrote it down. So now we're actually saying the exact flip of what we said before. If we're saying Moshe was zocheh to the names of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, now we're saying, and that was the crowns that Rabbi Akiva had. Now we're saying the opposite. Rabbi Akiva in future generations is able to take that liquid form and then harden it to a way that we can understand it, that we can relate to it, that we can now come and learn the water and come let sameh and learn the Torah of Rabbi Akiva and really get it. Moshe Rabbeinu had it a much more primordial, earlier understanding of the Torah. And I think this works very well with the Rav Moshe Wolfson we've been speaking over the last couple of weeks, that right now when Moshe's writing it, it's flowing water, it's Dema, it's Demaot, it's tears, it's the deep secrets that we still can't grasp, or that generation couldn't grasp it just yet. It was because that generation was too high to understand it. But in the later generations, L'sof Kama Dorot, we get to Rabbi Akiva, we get to the Yomot HaMashiach, the Ikved HaMashiach, and now when we're at these end generations, now we can begin to understand it, because now this Dema, these last 8 psukim corresponding to the last generations, now this part of Torah is now coming about. This also explains the idea that we have this idea that when it comes to Kabbalah, when it comes to the secrets of the Torah, that more and more get revealed, more and more get understood as we get closer to Mashiach. That while the Rishonim were hinted to it, the Ramban, one of the biggest ones, to hint to some of these deep ideas, the Gemarot hints to these deep ideas. It's the same Rishon Bar Yochai that's teaching the Talmud, it's teaching the Zohar, but it gets revealed slowly. Then the Arizal reveals even more. And as we keep learning and growing, and the generation gets closer to Mashiach, we're not coming up with new Torah Chas v'Shalom. This is not Torah Chadasha, but rather what is it? It's now the making of the tears of Moshe. We're making this purer form of water crystallized so we can understand it, and that's the chidush of the Sof Kama Dorot, that those last 8 psukim are beginning to take form in a lo b'shamayim way, in a way that we can understand it, or maybe we're being uplifted. Again, same idea from the other angle. We're being uplifted up to the Shamayim as we get closer to Mashiach. We're getting closer to seeing the letters in their more natural form, in the names of God, but actually beginning to understand it. To close with one last beautiful remez, beautiful hint I saw in Sefer L'Horot Natan, really beautiful. He writes, if you look at our Girsa in the Gemara, it says when Moshe Rabbeinu went up to Rabbi Akiva's shiur, the shiur that originally he couldn't understand, he's sitting in the 8th row. Now, why the 8th row? What does 8 symbolize? So we spoke in the past, 8 is the head. 8 we know is Lemala Min HaTeva, is now above nature. We're not actually getting maybe above this world. This really is the Sharnun. We're getting to the highest, deepest levels of the Torah. Says Sefer L'Horot Natan, putting everything we said together. 8 is a hint to these last 8 pesukim, the Torah written in Bdem'a. Moshe Rabbeinu is now sitting in the 8th row, learning how to write these last 8 pesukim, learning how to write in those tears. Now again, the tear imagery, the water imagery, we know Rabbi Akiva and the water imagery, that it's those drops of water that are piercing through the rock, that start Rabbi Akiva on his great path to the greatest Torah possible. Right now, Moshe Rabbeinu is learning the koach of the water, the koach of the Torah that's nimshal to water, the koach of the tears, the koach of the drops. And if you do it right, we can reach the greatest names of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Chag Sameach.